In this video, we're going to talk about setting up workflow conditions in Cobblestone Contract Insight. In the last video, we talked about this Name and Options tab. Once you click Name and Options and save, you are going to see the next three tabs appear: Conditions, Tasks, and Alerts. We are going to start with Conditions. Conditions are, of course, an imperative part of setting up workflow in Cobblestone. Conditions are one of the two main indicators that will usually tell your workflow when it is time to get ready to fire. And adding conditions, in essence, is really straightforward. Just click Add Condition, click Field, and then from the drop-down list, you're going to add a condition to start. The most common condition that we ever add is status. And I like to use my little Control F function to find it quickly. So I'll just do Control F, type in status. There it is. Click it. Then there we go. From here, I'll do the same thing. I want to see the starting status. This is the first workflow in an approval process. So the status should be whatever the default status is when adding a new record to the system. And in my case, it's pending. So I'm going to do Control F again and just find pending. I certainly could have scrolled down, but I think this is easier. So there's pending, and I'll click Save. The value here could be different for you. And of course, the condition could be different for you. But this is the most common situation for really any clients that I work with. So there's one condition, and that might be fine for you. If you have a very straightforward process, you have the same approval process for every contract, you may only need one condition, right? Every contract, whenever it's entered, the status defaults to pending, and boom, it triggers this workflow approval step. In our case, we are going to go one level deeper, add one more condition. In this case, where the contract type must equal NDA. So we'll do Control F again. We'll go find the contract type field, and then I'll choose NDA from my drop-down list again. And as a reminder, I did that because over in Name and Options, this is specifically an NDA approval process. And now that's it. In my case, that's how you do it, though. You click Add Condition, choose a field, and then choose the value of that field that you want to filter by. This can be very simple, very complex. It depends on your needs. Another way to look at this is that we have a standard condition, like a default condition, which is status. So almost every single approval process that I build, that I see clients build, will have status as like the primary condition. And now the status here will actually change from workflow step to workflow step. So step 1, this equals pending. Step 2, status may equal legal review. Step 3, the status may equal finance review. So like the status is going to change. Meanwhile, the other fields, the other conditions are going to vary a bit more considerably from process to process, from system to system. In my case, the other condition is the contract type, but for yours, it certainly might be contract amount or department or location or really any other number of fields. In my case, I just chose contract type. But what's interesting is that actually contract type equaling NDA won't change for this process. For this particular process, it's always going to say, no matter what the status is, the contract type is going to equal NDA because that's going to be omnipresent throughout this approval process because it's an NDA approval process. So it must always be an NDA. I have like a parallel process here for the contract type equaling consultant agreement, but in my system, that's a separate approval process. And I wanted to acknowledge two more things about the conditions. First, this is where things can get a bit hairy in terms of configuring workflow. If you have a more complex approval process, I'd recommend using a Visio diagram or Excel or Word or pen and paper or whatever it is to map out what your workflow is going to look like. And then on each of those workflow steps, I would write out what the condition is going to be for each step. So then when you go into the system to configure the workflow, you know what your conditions are. Workflow can just simply get more complex if you have a lot of different conditions and exceptions in the approval process. So this is best to think out ahead of time. So then when you're in the system, it's a smooth, straightforward process. And the second thing I want to acknowledge, and this is going to transition us into the next tab, is that conditions are not the only thing that tells the workflow when to fire. I like to use sort of a silly analogy here that says workflows are sort of triggered like a relay race or something like that, like in track and field, for example. So Conditions will tell the workflow basically when to line up on the starting line, like of that race. Workflow's really always looking in the background to see when it's ready to get on that starting line. Every time you really ever update anything in Cobblestone or add anything to the system, it does check all of the workflow basically. And if any of the field conditions happen to be met, that workflow can get ready to fire. It will sort of line up at the starting line. But it's not necessarily going to start running yet. It doesn't really hear the starting gun, right? It's going to get on that line and it might wait like half a second, or it could wait like a year. It depends. But either way, when the conditions are met on a given record, the workflow is sort of get ready, so to speak. Now, if I go over to tasks, and let's just add a task, we're going to scroll down to the task start date. This is like the starting gun. Bang, go on the task start date. And usually for an approval process, we set this up to be 0 days before or after a certain date. And for an approval process, that's usually date updated. And so what this is saying is, hey, whenever the conditions are met, the workflow is going to line up at the starting line and get ready to run. And when is it going to run? In this case, it's going to run immediately, right? Exactly on the time that the workflow is updated, pretty much, it's going to fire as soon as it's updated. So this is the scenario where it's going to run in like half a second. But you could do something like this. Let's say I'm trying to set up a workflow on some sort of situation to remind me of an upcoming expiration. I will be notified, in this case, 60 days before a contract's expiration date. Right? So in this case, it's going to wait, I don't know how long, quite a while though, right? It's going to wait until 60 days before the expiration date, maybe 10 months on average or so, but it's going to wait a while, right? So it's going to line up at the starting line. It's going to wait, it's going to wait, it's going to wait until 60 days before the expiration date. So really the two most important factors that trigger when the workflow will fire are the conditions and then the task start date. So that is how conditions work in workflow in Cobblestone Contract Insight. I should acknowledge also that these are kind of and statements. So this condition and this condition have to be met. There are methods to configure this to say this or this except for this, basically modify the SQL here, but that is a conversation for another video. Either way, these are the basics and how we set up workflow most of the time. Check out the next video where we'll talk about how to configure tasks. Thank you.